A bobcat sat motionless outside a toddler's crib window every single night. When authorities arrived to remove it, they froze, because the wild predator was wearing a police-issued K9 collar with a dead officer's name on it. Who trained this animal, and why was it guarding this child? But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The air inside the nursery had always been still, thick with the warmth of night feeds and lavender-scented lullabies. But now it clung to Allison like a warning. Her eyes were fixed on the narrow frame of the window, where the silhouette of the bobcat loomed in the moonlight, its eyes two golden embers suspended in shadow. It didn't flinch when the deputy's boots crunched onto the gravel path outside. It didn't so much as twitch when Brenda, the animal control officer, slowly raised her flashlight. The beam struck its chest. There was no snarl, no hiss, no flash of teeth. Only a faint shimmer where the metal tag hung from the collar, an impossible, unmistakable shimmer. Allison stood in the hallway, arms locked around Charlie's sleeping form, his little head buried in the crook of her shoulder. She didn't speak, couldn't. Her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and throat, as if saying anything out loud might shatter the eerie tableau unfolding at the window. Brenda was the first to move. She stepped forward, cautiously, murmuring low and steady words. Her hands weren't on her tranquilizer gun, and her body language said what none of them dared to voice. This wasn't a typical animal encounter. Something about the bobcat's presence was off, not threatening, not fearful, just deliberate. Deputy Latham leaned closer to the glass. "That's an issue collar. That's department standard," he whispered. "How in the hell?" Deputy Ruiz, standing behind him, cursed under his breath and pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Ruiz. We've got a live bobcat at the Monroe residence. Affirmative, it's collared. Affirmative, it has a tag. No, we haven't engaged. Copy." His voice trailed off. Brenda was crouched now, her eyes locked with the animal's through the glass. She didn't flinch when the bobcat blinked, slowly, solemnly, then turned its head slightly toward the crib before returning its gaze to her. A motion not of curiosity, but of confirmation. "Jesus," Latham muttered. "It's not just sitting there. It's watching the baby." The collar's tag glinted as Brenda raised her light again. The letters engraved on it shimmered into view. Her voice, usually calm and measured, faltered when she read it aloud. "Scout, if found, return to Officer James Monroe." No one moved. Even the radio stayed silent, as if the signal itself had recoiled. Allison staggered back against the wall, her pulse a roar in her ears. James Monroe was dead. Buried 2 years ago with full honors and a folded flag. And yet, somehow, impossibly, this wild animal wore his name. Not one of them noticed the bobcat had not moved a muscle. Not since they'd arrived. It had waited, as if expecting them, as if this was only the beginning. Brenda's voice hung in the air like the final note of a hymn, unsettling in its calm certainty. "It's guarding someone." Allison stood frozen, barefoot on the hardwood, her body swaying slightly as though her mind couldn't keep up with the implications. The name on the tag echoed louder than any alarm. James Monroe, her James. She clutched Charlie tighter, instinctively shielding him from a presence she couldn't define. The deputies, both seasoned, both visibly rattled, circled the bobcat slowly, hands hovering near holsters but not committing. The animal hadn't so much as flinched. It simply sat at the front door like a trained sentinel. No snarl, no panic. Just purpose. Deputy Latham, squinting under his wide-brimmed hat, gave a dry swallow. "That badge number's real," he murmured to Ruiz, who nodded with a bewildered expression that suggested his thoughts had long left the realm of rational police procedure. "James's number," Ruiz confirmed. "That was his." Brenda, still crouched low, extended her palm in a slow arc. The Bobcat didn't recoil. Instead, it turned its head slightly, eyes darting between her face and the door behind her. Its breath came in slow, fogless puffs in the desert chill, controlled, watchful. "He's waiting to be let in," Brenda said quietly, as if raising her voice might disrupt a fragile code. "He knows this place." Allison's knees buckled slightly as she lowered Charlie to the couch. Her eyes locked on the animal, its thick haunches, the ghost-gray fur stippled with orange tufts around the jowls, the faint scar across its left ear. There was age in it, and something else. Memory. "This isn't possible," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. James never brought animals home, especially not this. The room seemed to pulse, dense with a surreal gravity that pulled them all inward. Brenda looked over her shoulder. "Do you still have James's things?" Allison nodded slowly, her voice hoarse. "Some. In the garage. Why?" "Because that cat isn't just sitting there like it knows your baby. It sat by the window, then walked straight to this door. That's not wild instinct. That's training. Bond." The Bobcat let out a low, nearly inaudible chirp, strangely soft for such a formidable creature. Not a threat. A signal. It didn't scratch, didn't paw, just waited. And in that moment, Allison felt it, that deep, unshakable certainty in her marrow. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a coincidence. This was James, not in body, not in voice, but in a promise kept, a presence left behind, in the creature that now waited patiently at the threshold of the home he could no longer enter, but had somehow never truly left. The sun had barely crested the ridge when they stepped out into the backyard, the morning air still laced with desert chill. Allison walked slowly, barefoot on the dew-damp grass, her robe cinched tightly around her waist like a shield. Brenda and the deputies moved beside her in cautious silence, eyes scanning the earth. Behind them padded Scout, silent, graceful, his paws making no sound against the packed soil. He wasn't prowling. He wasn't curious. He was escorting. Each step seemed measured, almost ceremonial, as though the Bobcat already knew exactly what they were about to find. Deputy Latham's boot came down just shy of the rosebush beneath Charlie's nursery window. The crunch of dry grass was interrupted by something else, a thunk, muffled and hollow. He froze, frowned, then tapped again. The same sound answered. Hollow. Wrong. He called for a spade from the cruiser. Within minutes, the ground gave way, dry earth turning over in chunks, revealing the edge of something too square, too deliberate to be natural. They hit the lid at just under 3 feet. It was military-grade polymer, the kind used for evidence transport or hazardous containment, sealed tight. Brenda knelt first, her fingers brushing away the dust, her brow creased with caution and disbelief. When they opened it, the air seemed to thin. Inside, time folded. Photos, yellowing slightly at the corners, depicted James Monroe in fatigues and desert tactical gear. Not his standard uniform. In one, he crouched beside a young bobcat, not yet full-grown, one hand on its shoulder like a handler might pose with a K9. Another showed him petting the animal through cage bars, his face unreadable, but his posture protective. Next came documents, some stamped confidential, others marked with the insignia of Homeland Security and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The pieces didn't just suggest a hidden life, they proved it. Allison's fingers trembled as she lifted the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably James's. Lean, deliberate, clean capital letters shaped by years of incident reports and field briefings. "My boy," it began. Her breath caught. "If you're reading this, then something went wrong. I never told your mom, but I was part of a task force that rescued exotic animals from trafficking rings." Her legs gave out. She dropped to her knees, the paper crushed against her chest. The words that followed blurred through tears. Scout's rescue, his loyalty, James's fear that someday he wouldn't come home. He'd buried it all, literally. Not to hide it, but to leave it behind for Charlie. Something of himself to bridge the silence of death. A final mission carried out by an animal the world would never understand. Brenda's voice was barely above a whisper. "He's not just a bobcat. He's a soldier." Scout sat in the shade of the window he had guarded for over 2 years, tail curled neatly around his paws, his gaze steady and unreadable. Not seeking approval, not waiting for thanks, just watching. Because he had been told to. The legend grew like heat rising off the Arizona clay, silent, steady, undeniable. The headline ran above the fold in the Coyote Ridge Chronicle, grainy photo and all. The canine bobcat who guarded his partner's son. To some, it was tabloid bait, a desert fairy tale wrapped in sentiment. But to the people who lived on those dusty streets, who had watched the animal sit vigil through summer winds and winter frost, it was gospel. Scout didn't need to prove anything. He came when the sky bruised purple. He'd pad out from the chaparral, lean body low and effortless in motion, pause at the gate, then leap it in one silent arc. He never meowed, never clawed, never trespassed. He simply assumed his post, always at the same corner of the nursery window, as if marking sacred ground. Neighbors left out water bowls. Children whispered stories about the magic bobcat who only watched, never hunted. A few tried to approach him. None succeeded. He had eyes for one house only, for one child, for one promise. Inside, Allison kept her routines simple: meals, books, playtime. But her world bent unconsciously around that window. She caught herself glancing toward it when the sun dipped low, listening for the sound of paws brushing gravel. Most nights he was already there, waiting. Then came the evening she left the window open a few inches. Not out of invitation, but curiosity. Charlie was teething, cranky, restless. She turned her back for a moment, and when she looked again, he was standing at the sill, tiny fingers clutching the frame, babbling nonsense into the dusk. Scout sat inches away on the other side. The two locked eyes, the same deep, unblinking gaze James used to wear during stakeouts. The bobcat raised one paw slowly, deliberately, and pressed it to the glass. Charlie squealed and mirrored the motion with his palm. No sound passed between them. But something did. For nearly an hour they stayed like that. Charlie humming softly, Scout unmoving. Allison didn't interrupt. She couldn't. The moment didn't belong to her. That night, she dreamed of James. Not the wounded version from the funeral, but the man she'd married. Whole, smiling, serene. He stood beside Scout, hand resting just above the animal's shoulder like they were still on duty together, one watching the crib, the other watching her. Eventually, Scout stopped coming. There was no farewell, no final howl. Just silence. But it wasn't absence. It was release. When Charlie stirred in the night and whimpered, his hand always found the window. And sometimes, on the windiest nights, Allison would step outside, heart aching with memory, and find no tracks in the dirt. But the faint scent of wild sage and dust stirred as if something had passed just moments before. She never said it aloud, but she knew. James had left behind a watchman. one forged in shadow and fire, bonded not by leash but by oath. And that oath was still out there, watching, waiting, listening.